Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And there's been a Reddit post in the WoW PvP section that has been making the rounds in the community in relations to a clip about Towelliee, explaining that Blizzard allegedly doesn't care about PvP feedback and to stop posting in the beta developer Discord because they're not going to be spending dev time on that stuff. I also just watched Venruki's video reacting to this post, and I wanted to give some of my thoughts and observations on the subject related to it, because obviously the next expansion is just around the corner. Now, I don't believe that I'm in the Discord that he's talking about, because I went to try and look at some of the Discords that I'm in to see like what types of feedback posts were being put in there or not. Honestly, I feel like feedback is in a very strange position where if your feedback either doesn't get a lot of upvotes, whether it's on the WoW forums, Reddit, or it's a YouTube video, generally it seems like it doesn't get a lot of attention, like irregardless if it's PvP feedback or whatever. This is just a trend that I've personally noticed. The best example for this was the dev Q&A that they recently did, where they included multiple questions in relations to PvP, and they also included my question. But my question was also boosted up a lot by the community because you guys are all engaging with it and you guys were all liking that post. And I think without that engagement, we probably wouldn't have gotten that question. Because they want to answer stuff that is, like hot button stuff that everybody is in agreement with, right? Because feedback is so personal and it can be so biased. Somebody could be writing a feedback post about their class and they want it to be really OP because they need it to be OP to get their rewards, and trying to filter that out without, this kind of like community oriented system where people upvote on things, it becomes like, I would think it's a very daunting task. Not that they shouldn't be trying to do it, but I can only imagine the infinite amounts of flooding feedback they get related to anything, right? There's probably little minor opinions that I have on stuff that it's like, you just can't like consume all of it, I would imagine. So I don't know if this is necessarily they don't care about PvP feedback. I feel like this is just feedback in general. If you're not getting a lot of upvotes on the forums, on Reddit, or of a trending YouTube video, I mean, even look at some of the things that they've iterated on it with the most recent patches, right? They come up with an idea, a UI change, add-on removal, and then they see how the community reacts to it, and then I assume they go after the most hot button subject matter that's related to it and see if it's in agreement with each other, and they're like, okay, well, everybody's in agreement with this, so this is something we should go back on, right? Because I can only imagine since Shadowlands, when they were trying to design the game around what they believed was kind of the core of World of Warcraft, everybody was like, we don't like this, but they were kind of ignoring it because they've thought like we need to lean into the strengths of this, but ignoring it to that point when it waves up that big, it's like eventually that was going to come back, right? That was going to come back and backfire. So that's my opinion on this, is that I don't even necessarily think that it's PvP only, although I have seen, and not Towelliee specifically, right? But I have seen other content creators. I don't want to name names. I'm not trying to throw flame or throw hate at people. I've seen other content creators, and I've also seen just like random people who play World of Warcraft. They don't like PvP. So, and for some reason, one opinion about it is that if PvP just disappeared, suddenly PvE would be the promised land. It would just be the perfect game ever, and there would be no problems whatsoever. It would just, and I'm trying to sit here, and if anybody can ever find me a single like class change system design decision that was biased towards benefiting PvP, that deliberately hurt PvE in exchange to benefit PvP, like I don't like, I'm almost willing to do a giveaway for you if you can find that. Like it directly states like, we're making this change for PvP, even though we know that it's going to be bad in PvE, because I think that the reverse of that is true, right? So making all the classes do AoE damage in the War Within is really fun in Mythic Plus. It's really fun in ARPGs, right? You just blast down a bunch of enemies like Dynasty Warriors. But PvPers are like, hey, AoE damage breaks crowd control. We like crowd control gameplay in PvP. Now, Blizzard didn't just totally ignore that feedback. They're like, okay, we see PvPers talking that AoE damage is going to be bad in PvP. What can we do? Because we're going to add it because we need it for PvE. Well, we'll increase the threshold so crowd control doesn't break on these tiny hits of AoE damage, so that crowd control can be more relevant. So, for example, if they didn't care about PvP feedback, I don't think that they would have engaged with that at all. They would have just been like, nope, here's AoE damage and go do your own thing. We don't care if it breaks sheep, right? That to me would be like deliberate negligence of PvP feedback. But again, that PvP feedback had a lot of public iteration, a lot of videos, a lot of posts, a lot of communication about it. So maybe that's the issue, honestly, is that we just need to be more coordinated and work as a team to get iterations of feedback for PvP, because another example was the gladiator mounts. They were just kind of below average as far as like aesthetically appealing for the War Within, and we all came together for the last season like, this mount, like, look at how cool the raid mount is, this mount needs to be at least a little bit closer, and they replaced the mount. So I think that's more or less the issue, is that we need to like come together as a coordinated voice for this type of stuff, rather than just being like independent little tiny voices that aren't being picked up or maybe are too biased or whatever it may be. And we need to be more coordinated. That's my take from this. We just need to be more coordinated. We need to like come together on things that we agree about being bad or potentially dangerous. Like for right now, the best example I can give for Midnight is not having an enemy damage meter, right? So a lot of PvP players, when they play, they have details open, and then the game ends, they can go in and see, what did the other healer do? You know, are they doing something that I didn't consider? Or what did the enemy DPS do? How did they take me out and stuff like that? And you can't do that with the default damage meter. That seems to be like a big, you know, like point there from PvP. So we likely need to come together and show why this is important. Honestly, I think it's a feature that could be important for PvE as well, to have like an enemy damage meter for dungeons, so you can see like, what is the boss doing, like who did he hit, and you know, how frequently is he hitting them, right? I feel like that could actually be useful in PvE, and it's really good in PvP. So this isn't even just something where I'm like, you know, but we're in this really weird place where, you know, there are definitely content creators, there's definitely players who don't like PvP, right? Plunderstorm was the best example of that. Plunderstorm was a PvP game, and they deliberately made a way to play it so you didn't have to attack players to complete it to get your rewards. You could just land, auto attack some mobs, and get out. You could literally leave the game or whatever. If a player started attacking you, just take your hands off the keyboard and not even care. And there was so many Reddit posts from people very angry that was even that, you know, that way, even though Blizzard did their best to incorporate them in a way where they wouldn't have to if they didn't need to. So I don't necessarily know if this is an issue of like Blizzard being negligent as it's being outlined right here, or if it's just that they have to satisfy a larger audience that absolutely despises PvP. And so I've seen some seasons where there's a really cool Vicious Gladiator mount, and reactions from casual players sometimes is positive. So someone like Taliesin and Evitel, when in Battle for Azeroth, when the Vicious mount was a hippo, Taliesin was like, "That's so cool, I need to go after that mount." And he did a bunch of world PvP in Battle for Azeroth as Discipline Priest, and he had a really good time, and he actually enjoyed his time, and he liked getting the mount, and it was a fun experience for him. And that's how I feel PvP should be. It's like the incentive is a cool cosmetic reward. You come and try it out. If you don't like it, you don't got to stay. If you do like it, maybe you stay for a little bit. Now you found another way to enjoy World of Warcraft. So I don't see how having PvP in the game isn't a net positive overall for Blizzard's, you know, balance sheet, even if it's less participation overall than PvE. It makes no sense to completely get rid of it, and I cannot for the life of me find a single example in history where Blizzard made either a class design decision, system design decision that negative, other than potentially Shadowlands Season 1, where we had like a trinket, I think, and maybe a 2400 rated weapon that PvEers needed. It was only technically better for pre-raid BIS, and after that it wasn't. But obviously a lot of PvEers felt like they were, you know, compelled to do it, didn't like that, and we're probably never going to get something like that again. Although they are now they are implementing the training grounds in Midnight, and the training grounds is against bots, right? But they're adding a quest for PvEers that gives you a good like neck piece, I think it is. So this quest that gives you a really good neck piece is gonna, PvEers will have to play, but they can play versus the bots, which I think is a fair median, you know, for the people who are like really just don't want players attacking them. They can just do that, get it and get out. But maybe somebody does it and like, hey, these battlegrounds could be cool, I'll try an actual battleground. I feel like this is like a nice way of getting people through the door with the training grounds that they're implementing in Midnight, without forcing them or compelling them into these situations where they feel like they're going to be stomped on or dominated or whatever it is, right? I'm not a professional psychologist to dig into the depths of why those players would feel those ways about that content, but I feel like that's a nice medium ground. And if they didn't care about PvP at all, I don't think they would be bothering to add like a new player experience to try and transition people into it whatsoever. And also, for the most part, my experience throughout Dragonflight, world PvP, world content, battleground content that they've been iterating more on now recently with the War Within, and now with the Epic BG, although maybe the Epic BG needs a little bit more iteration on. I feel like they're adding the end game PvP zone, although I will say it was kind of memey with Koresh, where they outlined in that 12-second times that frame that was a PvP island. That was kind of like, what? I don't really understand what that was, but it's like a one world quest that's not up all the time, so it's kind of outlined as like this permanent PvP island. It wasn't what it seemed like on the video, at least. That was definitely strange to me when it happened. But PvP is obviously getting a lot of attention. Now, when it comes to the development cycle for an expansion, Blizzard is hard pressed to release an expansion now, like every 2 years or whatever. So obviously they're going to have to pipeline and prioritize things. And the pipeline prioritization that I've observed is that in beta cycles, their focus is leveling content, because that's the stuff everybody's going to touch. That needs to not be buggy. It needs to be good, whatever, right? Like, that's first priority every single beta cycle. And it's always like that. You can only level up. There's no end game testing. And then it's the raids in the dungeons, because the raids in the dungeons they need a high level of integrity on release, because they're competitive modes of content. If they're broken, you can get a bunch of rep for free and gives you a bunch of gear over other people, then the whole season is effectively ruined, right? Or if a raid boss dies too easily, or it's way too hard, or whatever it is, like, that content immediately needs to be viable and as strong as possible. And then PvP, the rated PvP season usually doesn't start until 1, I think, or 2 weeks after the expansion's released. So there's no real like high level competitive need for everything to be completely perfect and completely polished on the release of the expansion itself. And then after the game is out, people start doing some battlegrounds, they get more data, and they usually iterate on it, and they dial it in pretty well. I think for the most part, ignoring Ret Paladins and Dragonflight Season 2 and Marksmanship Hunters currently, for the most part, the class balance has been very solid, either overall or with rotating specs in and out in terms of viability and shifting metas. So I don't feel like PvP feedback or balancing has been like completely neglected in a lot of those cases. I would probably say that that's more or less just a symptom of needing to pump out content faster. So you need to have your priorities set into a different restriction. Like, if they were just ignoring the PvP feedback, they wouldn't tune it at all, even a week into it or 2 weeks into it. And usually also they do new PvP talents in like the 0.5 or the 0.1 patch after the expansion comes out, because also they're introducing a bunch of new class stuff at the start of the expansion. Do they want to double down and overlap a lot of PvP talents on top of it at the same time? See, it makes sense chronologically, and it makes sense from a development standpoint in terms of making the content relevant, as relevant and not buggy as possible for as many players as possible. And given how many giant undertakings they're doing right now with the UI and stuff like that, that's probably the case. Now, would it really take that much time to like bring aim shot damage down a little bit? I don't really know. Okay, I don't really know about that. Like, it does feel like that's like that, just that tiny little bit of annoyance. But I don't feel like they're completely ignoring PvP feedback. I think it's just there's been a shift on feedback that you need to have a lot of community backing and evidence that other people also share your opinion on this feedback. Otherwise, it's going to be just seen as kind of like not super relevant, probably. And again, this is just me thinking of what it could possibly be, my observations externally, because for the most part, I think things have been really good and very solid, ignoring the Marksmanship Hunter and the Destro lot currently. And obviously they're bringing the Gladiator amount down a little bit. I would obviously like to have PvP rewards for Solo Shuffle. I don't know if they don't want to do that because they know that 3v3 will likely have next to no participation if they do that. And obviously my opinion on it too, and I'm kind of an OG player, is that the 3v3 bracket is like the best experience you get from the game, especially if you form bonds and make a main team and you spend seasons going after that Gladiator. Like, that is one of the best experiences that you can have in World of Warcraft. So if you shifted it to Solo Shuffle and now no one's pursuing that, because obviously it's just easier to press the Q button than it is to try and find a team and queue with them regularly, I do think that there's a insanely good experience that gets hollowed out from the game. But it isn't to say that Solo Shuffle shouldn't have something. So I don't know if they're, again, reluctant to add something because there are PvE players that will then be upset, like, oh my god, PvP is getting something, I can't believe it. Is that the reason? We'll never really know. But I do think that the other reason is that they also value the experience that you get, because there's a lot of people that work at Blizzard that are literally BlizzCon Arena AWC champions or rank 1 PvPers, and they know that from firsthand experience of going through it itself. While it does have the negative element of being a struggle, very intimidating, of trying to get a team going together, if you do actually get through it, maybe a part of the struggle is what actually makes it that great of an experience, right? As opposed to other things that are kind of just easy and they blow over and you get your reward really fast and then you forget that you have it a day later. That experience is not something like that. And I think it's nice that the game has easy blowover content and this kind of like aspirational pursuits to go for as well. But those are my opinions on it. I don't know. I can't say for sure whether or not this is how they are, right? This is just coming from Towelliee. Specifically, if that's how they feel. I think the other reason that maybe people would feel that way is because, way back in the day, what was that video of a guy saying, he was like, "Shut up, PvP guy," or something? It was like a clip of it. But I think that was related to Diablo. But it obviously does feel like there is a shift in almost all games away from PvP content, or because most PvP games are struggling. So I don't know. I think it's just a priority is the thing with development for the expansion, getting the expansions out on time and in a way that all of the content is satisfied to their players, as efficiently as possible. And it isn't that it's just completely ignored, but it is that, PvE, I think, will always be the priority. And I wouldn't expect that to not be the case. But if there are glaring issues with PvP that aren't being resolved, then we have to, team up as a community and make sure that, that those messages are being distributed in a way that can actually be dealt with. But that's my breakdown of it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching as always, and I will see you guys in the next one.